Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor John Coombs, a professor in the history department, and it is a real pleasure to once again be hosting the Society of the Cincinnati Visiting Lecture, and I want to echo President Stimpert in thanking the Society for its generous sponsorship of this series over the years, and as for this particular meeting, right, also the college's 250th Planning Committee and my colleagues in the Department of History as well. Since the inaugural lecture in 2008, given by Douglas Bradburn, who was then a lowly assistant professor at the State University of New York at Binghamton, and is now president and CEO of George Washington's Mount Vernon, the series has showcased excellent scholarship on the American Revolution and the founding, including winners of prestigious prizes such as the George Washington Prize and the Pulitzer Prize. So if past is prelude, we're all in for an interesting and compelling and engaging evening. And I'm therefore pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Craig Bruce Smith. Professor Smith earned his undergraduate degree in history from St. John's University, and master's degree in both European and American history from Brandeis University, where he also received his PhD. He is taught at Tufts University, William Woods University, and the U.S., these are very complicated titles here, the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies at the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, which, by the way, is where I attended second grade when my dad was at CGSC. Before joining the faculty at the Joint Advanced Warfighting School at the Joint Forces Staff College at the National Defense Universities. Like I said, these are very elaborate, where, notwithstanding the mistake in my promotional poster, he was promoted to full professor in June of last year. His publications include George Washington's Lessons in Ethical Leadership. Forgive me, I'm going to forget how to do this. Co-authored with Dan Demetriou, published by Mount Vernon as part of the George Washington Leadership Institute's Lessons in Leadership series in 2016, and his own monograph, American Honor, The Creation of the Nation's Ideals During the Revolutionary Era, published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2018. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to the Hill to Professor Craig Bruce Smith.
Well, thank you everyone for the warm welcome here. I'm always happy to visit any place that has a 1775, a 1776, or even a 1783, somewhere in the history. So Mr. President, you pretty much gave my talk, so I think I'll just be done for the evening. But like a good professor, I will take what you said and stretch it out for probably 45 to 60 minutes and just randomly tell stories about things and collect my check. I'm thrilled to be here at a place that actually has some real revolutionary history. I'm thrilled to speak with anything that involves the Society of Cincinnati. I've long been a friend of the Society of Cincinnati. I hope to continue to be. And I'm thrilled to follow in the tradition of His Lordship, Douglas Bradburn, Andrew O'Shaughnessy, and others. And while I cannot count myself among such vaunted Pulitzer Prize winners and Washington Prize winners yet, maybe one day. So I'm here today to talk about George Washington. And sure enough, I'm going to reference Cincinnati. So what I'm going to do today is take you on where this whole Cincinnati thing comes from. So your president did a very good job as a warm-up act, so thank you. And I'll take it from here. So before, I know we're in Virginia. I know I'm talking about George Washington. I'm supposed to start with Virginia, but I'm not. I'm going to start in Britain. I'm going to start here at the Queen's Palace, which was known as the White House. Why? Because it was painted white. And it was earlier than our White House. It's very close to where Kew Palace is today, although it's no longer there. You can find an old sundial. But I'm going to start the story here, and it's July 3rd, 1782. The war isn't quite over. It's after Yorktown, so it's getting there. One morning, an artist makes the ride from his attached house in London, his 4-story attached house. He was doing very well for an artist. He wasn't starving. And he rode out to the Queen's Palace. Now, this palace wasn't the traditional head of state. This is not Buckingham Palace. This is not Windsor. This is where the royal family could live more formally. Less formally, I should say. But when you're a king and a queen or a prince, that's still pretty formal. The illusion of privacy. And he was out there, he thought, to discuss the restoration of some chapels at Windsor Castle. The artist was born in Pennsylvania. He grew up dreaming of being an acquaintance of kings and emperors. And all his friends and family laughed at him, saying, "No such people live in America." But here he was in Britain. As royal artist and portrait painter to the king, Benjamin West. So he's a portraitist for George III. He comes to the palace thinking he's going to meet the queen to discuss renovations of the chapels in Windsor. And he does. The queen was never a great favorite of West. He had American sympathies. He knew Benjamin Franklin. He was never shy about his belief in the cause of his own nation, but he loved the king. The king was his patron. And so he was tolerated by the queen. So after a quick, rather perhaps brusque discussion, something strange happened. The queen, Charlotte, you may remember her from such films as Bridgerton, led him into her bedroom. She then led him into her closet. Inside was seated the king. Slumped down in his chair was George III. It hadn't been a good year for George III. The preliminary Treaty of Paris, ending the war, formally recognizing American independence, was about to be put through. Only days earlier, the Prime Minister, Rockingham, had died. The king wasn't told. The king wasn't even told he was sick. His suggestions for replacements were brushed aside by ministers. Coming in was the Earl of Shelburne, who was very much willing to grant American independence. In fact, he said, well, this has been settled already. Let's just get this over with. George III was focused on what would happen next. West, who's probably completely confused by what's going on, may start to realize he might have been brought here to speak to the king rather than to the queen. The king frequently talked to him about all matters American. He was born in America, and he had contacts. His information was good. Knowing that American independence was being discussed, was being openly accepted in Parliament, the king could have asked Benjamin West anything. Anything about America, anything about independence, anything about what could happen. But he was focused on one man. And he said, with an English accent, West, what will Washington do should America become independent? Benjamin West doesn't miss a beat. He said he plans to retire to private station. Now I'm going to do this, Mr. President, but I'm going to do it with an accent, so it's going to be slightly different. He pauses. If he does that, then he shall be the greatest man in the world. Now, he absolutely, George III, absolutely says this. We know this. We could actually put on a date. It's often been, there's lots of varying dates bandied about. It's July 3rd, 1782. This is not a mishearing. This is not exaggeration. It's recorded in a diary. We have it. We know it's said. The king's going to make a later reference to this. Why is this so impressive? The king understands the legend, I shouldn't say the legend, the story of Cincinnatus who was given dictatorial power for 6 months. He returned it in 16 days. Could have been a dictator. Could have been perhaps worse, but he turned it over. The king understood this, and he points this out. So what is this? The king recognizes for what it is. This is the highest form of civic virtue, of giving up what is best for you in service of a nation, in service of a cause. George III had actually debated abdicating and moving back to Hanover, his ancestral home, but he couldn't do it. And this is when he thought he was losing power. He wasn't ending monarchy. He wasn't giving up power. He was just passing it off to his ne'er-do-well son. He recognized there was something different. This moment of Cincinnati surrendering his sword, or in this case, an axe, of doing what is best for a nation, for a republic, is the pinnacle of civic virtue. It was viewed as such during classical eras. It had just sort of vanished since then for 1,000+ years until Russell Crowe resurrected it. So if you have seen Gladiator, it is loosely sort of a Cincinnatus analogy. He throws down a sword once and he throws down an axe once, so there you go. Okay, but I'm supposed to talk about civic virtue. I'm told here at Hampton Roads, this 250 celebration is all about civic virtue, which is great. I think that's fantastic. The problem is, if you look at this graph of Google Ngrams, which charts uses of words and phrases in printed books, periodicals, what have you, no one actually said those words during the American Revolution. Occasionally they would come up. No one talked about civic virtue. When did that happen? That's really a modern thing. That's when people put together lectures and symposiums and give it a theme. No one said that. Does that mean they didn't talk about civic virtue? No. Absolutely they do. Now, I know this is an all-male school, so at least all of you are thinking about Rome right now. The same thing was true in the 18th century. Look at that around the American Revolutionary era. Look what's spiking in use, the term Roman virtue. All good Anglo-Americans believed they were the heirs to Rome. What about the Italians, you may ask? No. Only Anglo-Americans could properly understand Rome. But anyway, so you'll see there is people in the 18th century on both sides of the Atlantic, the British, the Americans, others as well, are thinking about the classical era, specifically Rome. They are heroicizing these great figures, Cincinnatus, chief among them. Where does this idea of virtue come from? So, 1774, some say that may be the start of the country. Some say that may be the start of Hampden-Sydney, I've heard. I know that's dicey, but just saying. But the terms virtue, concepts of civic virtue are there from the beginning. Here we have the First Continental Congress, where you see they are pledging, we do for ourselves and the inhabitants of the several colonies whom we represent firmly and agree and associate under the sacred ties of virtue, honor, and love of country. The idea of service to a nation, a common cause, before there even is United States. Those same sentiments are issued again in the Declaration of Independence when we mutually pledge our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. And you could even do some wordplay here, sacred honor. The idea of making something a civic religion. So, the question is, I'm using terms like honor, virtue, civic virtue. What is all this stuff? Does anyone actually use those terms anymore? So when was the last time someone used honor in a daily conversation? Maybe you in front of a judge? Anyone in front of a judge lately? Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts, something like that. So what's honor, what's virtue? Okay, so let's go to some authorities. A Cambridge professor. There's no easy undertaking to explain a word which is used by all men very unsteadily, and by most without any meaning at all. Dr. Samuel Johnson, sort of inventor of the British dictionary, said honor was dignity, reputation, or virtue. Noah Webster, yes, of Webster's, says honor was any particular virtue much valued. Thank you, Noah. That was very clear. Military treatise of the time, an essay on the art of war, says honor is a vague expression to which custom is given different meanings. So what is honor? What is virtue? Anyone want to throw out some ideas? This is the interactive portion. You're also being filmed, so no pressure. Anyone? What do you got? Yeah. Hmm? Right, so I think that's great. So the idea, it can be personal, your internal value, sense of what is right and wrong, but there's also a societal element, right? That there's left and right limits of, that you may think something's great, but if everyone else in society says no, then you may not be recognized as being honorable. Anyone else have any thoughts? What's virtue? You don't have to put on a toga to answer this. Okay. So, yeah. So I think you're spot on with virtue and morality. So virtue and morality usually go hand in hand, and it often depended where you were in the colonies. The further north you go, honor and virtue are separated, with virtue taking prominence, more focused on religion. The further south you go, the terms are almost interchangeable. So here's quick definitions. Honor, reputation, duty, proper conduct, virtue, usually tied to morality, religion, a sense of the greater good. Ethics. We talk a lot about ethics today, not so much honor or virtue, but if you're talking about ethics in the 18th century, you were talking about moral philosophy, but more likely you were literally talking about Aristotle. The term ethics really wasn't used. So if you're looking for some quick shorthand, again, there's nuance to this, but the terms honor, virtue, and ethics are oftentimes used interchangeably. So when we're thinking of a term like civic virtue, it would be very much tied to national honor or a sense of the common cause or common good. Okay, here's some more Google Ngrams. You'll notice that the most frequent usage of terms like honor, virtue, both spellings of honor, both British and American. We dropped the U in the 1820s. And terms like national honor, they are peaking in the Revolutionary era, in the Federal era. They dip down, and then something happens in the 1860s. Who's to say? So, how come we don't talk about honor anymore? Well, we do. We just use a different word for it. So you'll notice in the early 20th century, right, pre-World War I, the terms honor basically dies and ethics rises. So we still are talking about these terms, simply using different words. I can bring you back to the 18th century and George Washington, because that's what you brought me here for. But the ideas are, we still have these same concepts. But let's talk about how they evolved in the 18th century. So young George Washington, the George Washington that probably starts the French-Indian War, is a very different George Washington than the one we know on the dollar bill. Why? Because he had more teeth. But also because he was younger. He's 20-something. He's a man on the make. He's trying to make a name for himself. He's trying to rise. He gets named as a major, then a lieutenant colonel, then a colonel with Virginia militia. Because he had military background? No, because his brother had the job. And his brother was dead, so who else is going to do it? This is a guy who, when he is in his early years, he's rash, he's arrogant. He's waxing and waning poetically about bullets whistling past his head. George II said, yeah, well, he wouldn't say that if he was used to being shot at more than this one time. He's out for honor. And by that, he means personal honor. He's out for his own reputation. So he is going to argue about his pay. He's not paid the same as a British officer. British officers with a king's commission of any rank would claim they outranked a colonial of higher rank. He would argue about how he was mistreated, saying that he's willing to serve his country, but not at a lower station. And he's actually going to resign over slights of rank and pay. He actually says, I'd rather serve for no money than accept this pittance. It's an insult. He's going to say when he resigns, He's doing it for my own honor first and country's welfare second. This is a very different Washington. But he's going to be rehabilitated. How? Well, the young Washington is not going to have a very good time at Fort Necessity. He's basically going to sign articles of capitulation where he admits to being an assassin. You probably shouldn't do that. Why didn't he know he was signing that? Well, he didn't speak French. He had a defective education. But he's going to rehabilitate himself at what becomes the Battle of Monongalia, Braddock's defeat, when he stops a rout and gets sort of viewed as this British hero. The problem is, Washington's going to observe that Americans generally fight better in the forests of North America against natives and the French than a bunch of guys in red coats lining up. Red does not camouflage against green. He's going to say, we are fighting just the same as these British regulars, but we're not treated the same. He was becoming frustrated with people advancing based on their birth status or based on where they were from, rather than their abilities. And he started to push for promoting based on merit. And this was something, not necessarily something completely shocking. He is still a loyal British subject. He believes himself firmly to be an Englishman, but he feels he is not being treated as a true Englishman, just like his other colonists. So, we jump to the end of the French Indian War. France is basically removed from the colonies, at least in the mainland colonies, and it's going to lead to the run-up to the American Revolution. So what causes the American Revolution? Come on, this is easy. What do we got? Good, nice, easy answer. So taxes is always a good one, but it's more than taxes. We know Americans do pay taxes. It's about the representation, but taxes is certainly part of it. It's representation, about feeling lesser than, treated as less of an Englishman. There are other things going on. Americans and Britons have been very fearful of a standing army. They've been afraid of a standing army, well, since Julius Caesar. Like I said, Anglo-Americans are the heirs to Rome. They've been afraid of a Caesar. They've been afraid of a Cromwell in the English Civil War. They view this as the army as potentially tyrannical. So when we have events like Boston being occupied in 1768, the British being deployed, being told to act as if they were in an enemy's country, resulting things such as the Boston Massacre, the closing of the port of Boston, the institution of martial law after the Boston Tea Party, Americans are very fearful of the military. They are fearful of what it can become. They are afraid of what a commander could become. So if you see this cartoon, this is basically showing British Parliament and ravaging America. You'll notice you have an officer who is supposed to be Thomas Gage holding a sword saying martial law. We're going to get the Second Continental Congress. Is this America's war? Is this New England's war? Ultimately, it's going to come to be viewed as an American war, that the cause of Boston, the cause of New England is the cause of all. This could happen to any other colony, viewing in sometimes individual motivations, saying that this could happen to us, viewing it as more collective. The question, who do you name as commander-in-chief? Well, you have a lot of options. You have British educated, British trained, British born Charles Lee, who's basically been hopping around Europe collecting different ranks. You have John Hancock, the wealthiest man in America. He's willing to finance a war. Why shouldn't he be in charge? The problem with these two is they're openly campaigning to a certain degree. Americans are really fearful of what a commander could be. But in that Continental Congress, there's only one man wearing a military uniform, and he's taller than everyone. So of course he gets the job. That is George Washington. It's more than that. He's also about the idea of this common cause, that if this was just New England's war and you put John Hancock in charge, it looks like a New England war. They want a Virginian. Why? Because Virginia is rich, powerful, and large. It also makes it American. So Washington, who is famously going to dart from the room every time his name is mentioned for commander-in-chief. Yes, there's a little drama, there's a little pageantry going on. Oh, I can't be commander-in-chief. He just wore his uniform to Congress. There's a little bit of acting here. He loved the theater. He was dramatic. He was theatrical. Ultimately, he is going to accept, and he's going to say, in his accepting, he's doing it for my country's honor and my own character. It's a fundamental reversal of the terms he uses at the start of the French and Indian War. Country first, individual second. So this, you'll see, is his commission that is given to him by Congress. You'll notice it doesn't say giving him a commission to win victory. It says they're giving it to him for trust and confidence in his patriotism, his fidelity. It's for the defense of American liberty, to act for the good and the welfare of the service. They are given to him because of his character, the idea of placing the nation first. This is really the heart of what civic virtue is. The problem, people that give him this commission have known him. They've sat in the First Continental Congress with him. They've sat in the Second Continental Congress. They know, and they're talking in private correspondence. He's a virtuous man. He's a good man. He's a man we'll all like. John Hancock actually gives orders to not print this in the newspaper. He's afraid of misunderstandings. Now, what misunderstandings he means, we can't be sure. But given the fact that we know Americans are afraid of a potential military figure becoming a dictator, it's most likely he's afraid of creating some sort of panic. What is this position of commander-in-chief? So he's worried about how this is going to play. He actually says, nothing of this goes in the newspaper. Not a word. The problem is Washington presides over a drill of 2,000 soldiers on the Philadelphia Common, and word kind of gets out. So what happens next is quite understandable. People get nervous. People that don't know him get nervous. Particularly the New York Provincial Congress. Now, he's a Virginian. The New Yorkers don't know him. And the New York Provincial Congress is led by President Peter Van Berg Livingston. He has two brothers that had served with the Continental Congress, so he would have been aware of Washington. But they are afraid. They don't know what to make of it. So Washington's going from Philadelphia to Boston to take command of the Continental Army. He stops off in New York. But the Provincial Congress wants to talk to him. And you'll notice they send a letter, an address, and they refer to him, Washington, as Generalissimo. Does anyone come across that term? It's usually not an American term. Generalissimo is a term that originates in the 17th century. It means something akin to sort of like a military strongman, military dictator. Think, sort of small island republic somewhere. It's believed, again, at least according to military dictionaries of the era, is believed to start with Cardinal Richelieu. And it was a term that was given to Oliver Cromwell, the one who is viewed as this usurper, names himself as Lord Protector for life, but he's not a king. Also Christmas ends. It's more complicated, but you get the point. They're going to send an address. And you could read, it's relatively short. They all have some opening boilerplate. Yeah, congratulations, great, yeah, Generalissimo, we're loving that. Oh, by the way, will you resign the important deposit committed into your hands and resume the character of our worthiest citizen? Basically, they're saying, what are you going to do when this war's over? This war has just started. He hasn't even taken command yet. He hasn't seen his troops. But people are worried, what will he do? They are consciously going to the idea of Cincinnatus. Washington read about Cincinnatus. He is very, very well read in the classics. As we said, good Anglo-Americans would know this. Washington understands. They understand Washington understands. Now, no one knows what's going to happen. If you think about back in history when you have a winning commander, what usually happens? They usually retain control of some sort. Maybe, change the title a little bit. They usually don't give up power. Washington is going to meet with them. He's going to meet with them in the Bronx. And he's going to set what I call his first precedent. And I think it's his most important precedent. Because a lot's often said about Washington and the founders in general that, oh, it's just rhetoric. They're just saying things. They don't actually mean it. But what happens if they make a promise and they stick to it? Maybe we should take them a little bit more at their word. Washington's going to respond to New Yorkers. Be assured that when we assume the soldier, we did not lay aside the citizen. And we shall most sincerely rejoice with you in the happiest hour when the establishment of American liberty on the most firm and solid foundation shall enable us to return to our private stations in the bosom of our free, peaceful, and happy country. Saying on June 26, 1775, I will give up power. This is the height of civic virtue, saying that citizens are soldiers. Soldiers are citizens. The idea of a citizen-soldier service to the nation. This is civic virtue personified, very much in a classical sense. Livingston is taken aback by it. And he says, we have to immediately publish this to avoid any confusion, to avoid any mistakes. Now, you could say, well, he just wants to make sure that we have everything straight. Or, my interpretation, he wants to make sure Washington has to hold to this. We get it in the press, we're holding him to this clip. Despite the fact, John Hancock has said, don't put it in the papers, it goes in all the New York papers, and it starts to spread. It starts to spread throughout the country. It starts to spread across the world. And it's accepted. This, in very, again, perhaps it's a bit naive, but this sort of removes a lot of the fears of this commander-in-chief. The use of the term generalissimo dies down. It lasts in Europe for a little bit, but news takes longer to get over there. So you see, within a few days of getting to Cambridge to take control of the Continental Army, the Massachusetts legislature is giving a completely different address. And they are remarking upon his attention to the public good. He hasn't done anything yet. He just showed up. His attention to the public good was taking up the cause of the nation and promising to surrender power when it's done. They're pointing out his disinterested virtue of nation over self. His patriotism, again, call to the nation. Doing this all, and you see the last line, for the good of your country. Washington firmly believes that service for the nation is honorable. It is virtuous. And he's going to say this, not simply for the officers, not simply for congressmen. He's going to say that every post in service of the nation. He means officers, he means politicians, he means soldiers, enlisted soldiers, which if you think about the 18th century, the terms honor and soldiers don't go together. Officers and gentlemen. The term of gentleman soldiers is going to be created in 1775. The idea that a common soldier could have honor. It goes further than that. The idea that anyone in service to the cause. That could mean women organizing boycotts or supplying the military or doing anything that benefited the nation. The idea of civic virtue in action. This announcement in New York in June 1775 is going to reach Britain, the rest of Europe, And a lot of what happens in British newspapers of the period, they'll just completely copy, cut and paste a American article in the newspaper. But there's actually editorializing on the Washington decision to give up power. And one Scottish magazine actually says, he's clearly trying to soften this and make sure that they have nothing to fear of their own Cromwell. And he's quite successful. You have other English newspapers talking about Washington. Remember, there's a war on. He is their enemy. He's engaged, leading a rebel army in treason. You have British newspapers talking about how Washington is a noble example of disinterested patriotism that Britons should follow. He's serving without pay. He's acting for his nation over himself. I'm going to jump forward to the end of the war. Washington constantly throughout the war is going to advance the idea of civilian supremacy, the idea of civilian control of the military. That his orders come from Congress, who has power solely from the people. It doesn't mean there aren't times where it gets dangerous. One of those times is in 1783 in upstate New York. Comes to be known as the Newburgh Conspiracy. Because it's a conspiracy, there's a lot of conjecture. We can't know everything. But what we can say is that the war is almost over. Peace, rumors of peace are circulating all throughout Europe, throughout America. American officers and soldiers, but this is mostly an officer story, have been promised half pay for life, a pension for life for their service. But Congress is out of money. So, hi officers who've fought and won a war. Remember that money we promised you? Yeah, we don't have it. How about 5 years? We're good? Great. Thank you. The officers are not liking this. There are certain sections, certain perhaps sinister cabals, perhaps not. Perhaps it's all a big misunderstanding. Possibly these officers are thinking about a couple of things. One, refusing to disband until they're paid. Refusing to disband alone, defying the orders of the civilian government, would completely destroy the whole ideals of the revolution. Or other possibility, they may be thinking about marching out west past the Appalachian Mountains and letting the British march out of places like New York and do whatever they want until Congress is so desperate they'll pay them to get them back. Or perhaps even worse, leading an armed coup against Congress. We'll never know exactly, but we do know an anonymous letter circulates through the camp at New Windsor and Newburgh, calling a meeting of the officers to discuss this. Washington is shocked. He's got a couple of ways to play this, though. He can go and just be his known temper, curse till the trees shake, as supposedly he did at Monmouth. Who knows? But he doesn't. He delays. He says, point of order. Only the commander-in-chief can call a meeting. I will call my own meeting, and I will do it later in the week, on March 15th. Anyone know what that is? The Ides of March. Caesar. Does he do that on purpose? No, it's just happenstance. But wow, does that Anglo-American Roman stuff always line up. So he calls a meeting. And Washington figures his old nemesis, who's tried to take his job before, Horatio Gates, British trained, is probably behind this. And he's right. He is certainly involved. He makes him the chairman of the meeting, which means, and Washington's really smart, if you're named sort of chair of the meeting, you cannot participate in the debate. Washington famously doesn't go to meetings. He usually prefers to address his officers in writing. So the meeting starts, and suddenly Washington bursts in. The doors open. Everyone's shocked. He's not used to being here. Oh, General Gates, may I borrow a moment? What's he going to do? Washington gets up and reads what comes to be known as the Newburgh Address, where he gives a call to their own personal honor, their own sense of civic virtue, and he harkens back to the Declaration of Independence, the promise of the Declaration of Independence, the same wording. Let me conjure you in the name of our common country as you value your own sacred honor, ding, to express your utmost horror and detestation of the man who wishes under any specious pretenses to overturn the liberties of our country, meaning regardless of the motivation, you cannot do this. I know you are aggrieved. Washington understands he's aggrieved. He's petitioned Congress. But you cannot do this. If you defy Congress, if you defy civilian government, this revolution was for nothing. We have won. Think about what we have achieved, and you could throw it all away. Now, Washington's not sure if this works. Some accounts say this is the finest example of oration ever given. You also find with Washington, it's always the finest example of whatever he did ever given. But people remark on there, nothing else need be said. It had achieved its mark, but Washington wasn't sure. So he went, ever theatrical, he went to plan B. Washington had been losing his eyesight. And so he had written the Newburgh Address in exceptionally comically large hand so he could read it without his glasses. But now he wanted to show vulnerability. He wanted to show of giving and sacrificing the self for the nation. That's why I wear glasses. Reached into his coat, pulled out his glasses, and goes, "I beg your indulgence, gentlemen. Not only have I gone gray in service of my country, I have also grown blind." And they start to weep. And with that, seeing that personal example, hearkening back to the original promise of the Declaration of Independence, this potential coup, this potential end of the American Revolution, as we know it, is thwarted. And we're going to see the Americans, the American Continental Army, emerge with honor, their virtue intact. And here's an image and his cunning use of glasses. This is the legacy where we're going to have the Society of Cincinnati born out of that in the same year, in response to the sentiments of officers for promotion of and continual. What's interesting is with the Society of Cincinnati, it's very much a sort of benefactors society to aid both those who were in the military and their families. Some people often accused it of having a sinister background. So I'm going to tell you a quick story because we have members of Cincinnati here, and I always like this. So if you go to Anderson House, which is their headquarters in D.C., they have a library and archive, which everyone should visit. And in their collections, they have something called the Secret Journal of the Cincinnati. Ooh, sounds like Ben Gates stuff. It's encoded too. Oh, getting really good. If you decode it, there is a cipher. When you decode it, all it talks about how the purpose of the Society of Cincinnati is to promote national honor and the promotion of brotherhood, fellowship with their former comrades. So, no sinister undertaking there. Washington's going to follow it up. He's the master of goodbye on December 23rd, 1783, which I think should be a holiday, at least should be a holiday where it took place in Annapolis, Maryland, in the State House, where Washington is going to surrender his commission back to Congress, the ultimate act of civic virtue. He's fulfilling the promise he made on June 26, 1775. A promise that many, as late as 1783, did not believe he would fulfill. Sir Guy Carleton, who was the commander-in-chief for the British in North America, said, America could not survive as a republic. Monarchy was a necessity. Washington would become the dictator, the king, the stadtholder, the prince, the whatever name you can come up with. There needed to be more of an authoritarian, monarchical figure. Louis Nicola, who was an Irish-born Continental Army officer, actually floated the idea of a King George Washington. George III had firmly believed he would be replaced. It would go from King George III to King George I. But that message he got from Benjamin West in 1782 about a year prior. The king believed it. He was waiting to see if it would be fulfilled, but he knew this in his mind. The king had been resisting independence for years, but within months of receiving West news, he was willing to go along with independence. So here, Washington is going to fulfill his promise and become the American Cincinnati. And it's going to be remarked upon throughout the world. It's going to be in various countries in Europe. My favorite one is from a Polish future revolutionary. He's going to say, it gave to the world a great and important example to learn. So new in the present times, or rather unknown. No one has done this. The idea that this is regarded from Moscow to Italy as something worthy of universal praise. And it's not just in Europe. In Asia, there are portraits of Washington, and he is regarded as having the virtues of the ancient Chinese sages. As president, he's going to uphold this idea of civic virtue, of nation first, of national honor above personal honor, saying the Constitution is the guide which I can never abandon. In his first inaugural, he will talk about how there is an ongoing connection between virtue, happiness, duty, advantage, and a continuing union. When he's finally going to say goodbye, proving again, Cincinnati's Part 2, the return. In his farewell address, he's going to set the precedent for the two-term presidency, which we know will last until FDR. He's going to talk about, specifically, virtue and morality in his farewell address. He's going to talk about many things, famously entangling alliances, about regionalism, sectionalism, about partisanship, all the things that he feared would get in the way of this civic virtue, this idea of this Roman virtue, of sacrifice for the nation. But we'll see when this is a 1797, again, it comes out again in 1799 after he surrenders the presidency. You'll see he's held up as a classical figure, as a new Cincinnati. And many say perhaps even a greater Cincinnati for not just giving up power, but establishing a republic and giving up power again. He's going to get a promotion even from George III. After giving up the presidency, no longer will he be the greatest man in the world. He will now be the greatest character of the age. He'll be depicted in American and European art as a Roman, as a classical figure. Even showing off the full body. And even into the modern times, it's this figure, this shaping of Washington as Cincinnati. And you'll see here, he's actually handing over his sword. Washington as Cincinnati. This image of Washington as Cincinnati is still going to captivate people too in the modern era. Don't believe me? Ask Arnold Schwarzenegger, who frequently discusses Washington as an American Cincinnati, as a figure that transcends borders, as a figure that, as he is granted his apotheosis, he is no longer just an American Cincinnati. He's no longer just the father of his country. Through this surrender, through this promise he fulfilled, he becomes the father of many countries. Thank you. All right, this is where you pepper me with questions. All right, what do you got? I do. Yes, so Cromwell absolutely is referenced both in the colonies and in Britain as a figure you want to avoid. And we still see remnants of this fear of a standing army today. So here's some trivia for you. If you think about the British military today, we have the Royal Navy, Royal Air Force, and the British Army. How come they don't get to be royal? Okay, so the idea of the Royal Navy protecting the home islands. Yay, heroes. RAF protecting the home islands. Heroes. British Army, yeah, potentially tyrannical. So Cromwell is absolutely held up as this figure of fear, and we've seen elements of it in America, and we have other, so for instance, after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 in Virginia, there's briefly a standing army that people are terrified of as a new Cromwell. When Edward Braddock comes over during the French and Indian War to fight the French, people, when he's marching through places like Philadelphia and Virginia and Pennsylvania, tyrannical. There's still this fear, but Cromwell, yes, absolutely, he's held up. He's referred to by many names. Names that by some of some of Washington's not so big fans in London are actually going to call Washington Lord Protector, literally linking him to Cromwell, saying, look, he's just another Cromwell. And one of my good pieces, again, it's circumstantial evidence, but I like it. It involves Benjamin West. Benjamin West is, when the surrender's going on, is actually painting a portrait of George III in like full martial splendor with armor and all these things. At the same time, Washington's surrendering. That same era, he's also painted a picture that's displayed. It ends up on a member of Parliament's wall of Cromwell closing Parliament, seizing power. So it's something that's very much in the minds of all. So Washington's family also has sort of kind of escaped England in the aftermath of the English Civil War. So there is a sort of, how much does Washington know about his genealogy? I think he knows more than he lets on, but he's certainly aware of that. Yes. Hmm? Yeah, that's, all right, so you're right. There was a lot of fear going right to the Constitutional Convention, right? What is this president going to be? That sounds a little monarchical. John Adams wanted to call him his democratic mightiness and, things like that, right? A little scary. Mr. President, not as intimidating. Maybe at a college, though, still pretty intimidating. But yeah, the idea that it's Washington, there's a lot of people put the faith in Washington. And Franklin's famously going to say, we don't have to fear because it is Washington. Everyone knows he's going to be the first president. It's no shock about that. Again, he likes to do his, I was surprised. I am not up to the task. Yeah, I'm sure he's apprehensive. I'm sure he's nervous. But he knows it's going to be him. But people trust in him. But the sense was he could stay as long as he wanted. But he was terrified of that. Because if he died in office, what would happen? That's the concern. Adams, to his credit, John Adams had the impossible job of following Washington. No one could have done that job. I think Adams gets a lot of flack. What he did very well is orchestrate the first peaceful transition of power between rival parties, following that Washingtonian precedent. When you actually have, that's a weird election. And you actually have potentially the discussion of a civil war. I think it's that moment it starts to dissipate. When it goes from, you've got the Washingtonian tradition, you've got Adams following it in a really contested, heated election. The precedent is set. And we could say, yes, there could be, this Civil War certainly complicates things. But it's pretty well ingrained in American society because of that Washingtonian precedent. And it's not just because of him. It's ingrained because of this older classical model. This is the ideal. So when you actually have a person give you the ideal, it really puts a lot of pressure on everyone else to follow it. Yes, sir. Yeah, I could tell you to buy my book. But I'll give you the quick answer. The quick answer is, I'm assuming he was, I'm not going to get, I'm assuming you're around 20, give or take, right? He was your age. Washington at your age was different than he was in the 40s and his 50s. Like, you will one day, in 20 years, you'll discover this. Maybe not. He was out to make a name for himself. He was hungrier. He was out. He doesn't have a family yet. He's trying to make his way. He's trying to live up to his older brother, who he can never live up to. He never gets his British commission in the King's Commission. He's been desperate for it since he's 14. Never gets it. And what he starts to do is, in some ways, it's a sort of individualistic way into thinking about other people. He starts to realize that other people are facing the same sort of problems he's facing, being treated as something lesser, as something less than things. He's like, oh, that's how I feel. He doesn't come to it necessarily from the collective first, like, we're all together, we're all American. He comes to it by recognizing similar things that others are facing. And this is just a good for instance. One of the things that really sets him on the path to being a revolution is, so Washington's a big fashionista. He loves shopping, shopaholic. If they had, internet shopping, my word, the man would be broke. So he would send to London for everything, and it had to be English, it had to be the best, because he had to keep up appearances. He's really, he's trying to make his way. And so he'd order everything with exacting detail. And how it functioned then was, if you were a gentleman, you were expected to have honor, so you bought it on credit. So it was like ye old credit card. So they'd send him the stuff, and they'd send him a bill later, and he'd say, well, we know you're good for it. Because of all the boycotts, and Americans were boycotting British goods, a lot of these merchants were calling in their debts. So one of the things that really shifts Washington, aside from being sort of looked down upon, though he feels he's just as able as any British officer, is a British company actually says, hey, you have to pay your bill. And he says, how dare you? Do you think I am so dishonorable that I would not uphold my obligations? This is the same as England's hand in America's pocket. So he comes to it in perhaps some less than high-minded ways, but sometimes you have to make it personal. Yes. Oh, okay. Okay, so this is precisely because he did surrender, that Washington was viewed as the natural person, because after 1783, literally the world is in awe of him. And the idea is that he can now be trusted. You put him as the president of the Constitutional Convention because he gives it legitimacy. He gives it the legitimacy that this chief executive, because everyone knows, Washington doesn't say much, but he's just sitting there. So it's like, yeah, he gives it the legitimacy, that you can put him there, and we know he's given up power. If he didn't keep it then, why would he keep it now? When he now has this whole reputation, he's famously going to say about officers in the Continental Army, he's going to say, an officer should be a gentleman with a proper sense of honor and some reputation to lose. Think he's willing to lose that? Chance at immortality? No way. So I think that's why he is so trusted. Whereas, had it Washington, hypothetically, again, this is complete what if. Let's say he dies in 1783. Maybe it's a different story, but he didn't. So that's what gives it the legitimacy. Whereby, if let's say hypothetically, another military figure. Let's say someone like Horatio Gates. Could he be trusted? We know he's involved in the Newburgh conspiracy. So it opens up. It's because it's him. So that's why it gets called the indispensable man, that many say he is the single individual that you cannot remove, that if you take him out, the whole thing falls apart. Again, I leave that for your discussions in history class. That's a good essay. Is he the indispensable man? Maybe. I tend to think, well, I don't tend, I think he is. Sure. Hmm? Yes. That's the tough one. Is he just a man? Is he a god, a demigod? Is he a superhero? What is he? Like how typical is he? So he's in many. Well, if you think about his background, he's from like he's in the upper class. He is in the elite. Anyone that tries, there's oftentimes people try to say, oh, he's middle class. He's just like you and me. Absolutely not. He's in the gentry. He's elite. He's just at the lowest end of it. So he's constantly striving, right? So he has a place to fall and a place to rise. So in a lot of ways, he is very reflective of Virginian society and then in American society. He is, again, the idea of a classical education, right? So he is reading the sort of same sort of things that any other sort of educated individuals are of the period. In fact, he's going to constantly reference his defective education, that he doesn't go to college. He really has this modest schooling. So is he something, divine? No, of course not, right? I think what's different about him, and it's tough to say, could someone else surrender power? Absolutely, someone else could. But they didn't. And if you look at prior moments in history, it didn't often happen. So he actually follows through with it. So I think that is something that's different. Obviously, the Constitution is the Constitution, checks and balances, what have you, that to rein in the potential tyranny of one branch or what have you, or if, let's say, it wasn't the kind and friendly George Washington, but it was the George Washington that you get in Assassin's Creed 3, where he names himself king. Let's say it was that George Washington. Yeah, I refuse to play it. I would not kill I would not kill George Washington. How dare you? Anyway, so the idea is, this is going back to the very Franklin, sense of a republic if you can keep it. The idea that Washington is going to say in his farewell address of that for this government to survive, for this Constitution to endure, you need virtue among the citizenry. So the idea, yes, there are checks and balances, there are restraints, but you need this civic virtue, you need this common understanding of what is proper, what is your duty to keep it in track. Because let's say it all fell away, let's say there was not virtue enough, then that's a whole different story. But so I'm not here to say he's a demigod or he was born fully clothed, like certain early biographers are going to say, or that he arose from Benjamin Franklin's lightning rod, fully dressed and on a horse. I'm not going to say that, but I will say he did something unique. I don't know if that means he is necessarily unique, that no one else could do it, but he did something unique, and I think that needs to be celebrated. And he gave us an example for others to follow. And would others have followed? Would others have done what he did? I don't know. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so what's interesting is George III in the beginning is really like anti-American. You've seen Hamilton, you know how it goes. Really anti-American. Obviously, it's going against monarchy. It's going against the very institution that he understands. Well, not even that he understands it. The world understands is right and correct and good, and that's Every nation in the world at that period is ruled by some sort of prince, potentate, whatever. So he's not a Washington fan. You do have Washington fans in England. They're usually from the opposition parties, and so you would have like literally celebrations of Washington victories, but it was done more to like embarrass the current administration. What really starts to change for him is later, after the war. That's when it changes. Now, the British officers at various times they're going to have, sometimes they're going to view him with outright disrespect. For instance, there's one famous, when the British officers are first interacting with the brothers Howe in New York, they refuse to call him by his rank. They will only call him Mr. Washington. Because it's a rebel upstart. We're not calling him anything. When he starts to win, so people love winners, even when they're beating you. So when he starts to win, like crossing the Delaware, then the respect starts to build. But for George III, this is why I think it's so unique. You really only see it when he gives up power. When you have some other British officers are starting, well, they'll begrudgingly recognize that he's pretty good at varying points, even though he doesn't win all the time. It takes that moment of giving up for George III to really come around, because it's something that George III would have studied. He really loved these classical lessons. He used to read aloud from Livy's History of Rome to Benjamin West. Why not? So it's this idea of this classical, this Roman virtue that George III has so ingrained in him as the ideal, and then Washington does that, and he himself could not. He's just overawed by it. At least that's my sense. Doesn't mean he wants to give up the crown. Sir.
I've always struggled kind of thinking about this issue when I reached out here. And I think this is a complex issue because on the one hand, certainly contemporary justice and possibility at the extreme of Washington being the king,
Yes.
less extreme of lifetime president.
Hmm?
And so, like, those kinds of statements tend to pump up Washington's decision, right, to step away from the command and so forth. But then balancing that is, what is the political reality in America
Yeah.
in 1780?
Oh, this is.
And I tell my students, this is like, there's not a chance in hell that Washington's going to be king after the colonies have just fought an 8-year war for their independence. Given the fractured nature of the American Union, this is 13 sovereign states. With Washington and the power of the continental monarchy is enough to install him as king. So part of this is like Washington kind of knows this on some level, right? The political reality of the situation. And then, as you know, right, there's a performative aspect to his personality.
Absolutely.
And I've always kind of wondered, like, some of this, and I'm not at all, I am, I guess, diminishing the act, which clearly impressed George III, which was a level of achievement we didn't win.
Sure.
But nonetheless, with Washington's cognizant of being a figure of historical significance.
Yes.
What is his legacy?
Yes.
What is his image? What the title that he uses as president, to the way he dresses, to the way he presents himself in public. He is highly, highly conscious of the George Washington brand, if you're going to put this in 21st century parlance. Where do you strike that
Okay.
balance?
So aside from discovering you're probably the anonymous account that yells at me at Twitter, no, this comes up very frequently. You're absolutely right. So the idea that, well, first of all, how likely is it he was going to be a king? It's very unlikely. Very unlikely. You don't, like you said, you don't fight a war against monarchy to then, right. It's highly, highly unlikely. That at least it would be accepted. I think that's where it goes further. Again, I don't think Washington had it in his character, but the idea of I think you're right that it would have been difficult for him to say, ha ha, I have the crown now, and then, like I think of the old Simpsons episode where the Russia sign flips over to Soviet Union. Whatever. People of a certain age got it. So, that would have been difficult. But could he have created some sort of, could there have been, splinter governments or splinter states or something like that? That, I think, is perhaps more feasible. Again, I don't think it was highly likely. But if you, but could he? This is the big question. This is always the what if. Well, and you actually have some saying, oh, no one could have done it even if they wanted to. Washington couldn't have done it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, maybe. But you're talking about a victorious general that is beloved by the country, that has an army, that has legitimacy, that has functioned very much. In many respects, the Continental Army has really been the only federal institution, the only national institution. Yes, there's the Congress, but they kind of run a... Yeah, right. The Congress runs away a lot. They're usually running, potential mutiny, run here. British, run over there. The Army is the stability. I don't think it's as far-fetched to say that Washington couldn't have, it's a what if, right? But I think he could have certainly held more sway, could have dictated certain things, perhaps as some of the Continental Army officers wanted to do at the point of a bayonet, dictated terms. So is it, could he have done it? There are some people that say no, including some Continental Army officers. But I also think how much of that is just hindsight of you've been protected because Washington did do this? And so of course it couldn't happen. Of course this wouldn't happen. Of course he couldn't have done it. Now, we know it would have been difficult. British Army, who was infinitely better than the American Army. I don't think anyone's going to question my patriotism for saying that. You would have to, again, kill an idea, occupy the whole country. That would have been very difficult to do. But if you think about what happens under the Articles of Confederation, this whole splintered element, could something like that have happened under a strongman Washington? I think that is infinitely possible. I shouldn't say possible, doable. And then...
To me, it raises an interesting question, the cognitive of the difficulty, right?
Hmm?
And I'm not saying Washington was incompetent.
Sure.
Right? But being conscious, cognizant of the fact that there's no way this country can accept a foreign. Like playing this out, right? By playing the character of the American
Sure.
in Cincinnati, the American case.
But the thing is, you're right.
I'm giving
You're,
something to the country.
you're right. He's absolutely playing a part. He is concerned about his reputation.
And that's itself a
Yeah.
contribution.
He's concerned about his legacy. He absolutely is. This is a guy that rewrites all his old letters because he's afraid people are going to judge him based on his handwriting. He cares. But I think that's the important part. So he actually does it, though. And this is where I always push back. That, yeah, we could say he couldn't have done it, but he actually does give up power. Yeah, there's some theatrical. The guy's a big diva. We get it. But he actually does it. And the point is the reaction. I think it's not just the American reaction, but the worldwide reaction. That everyone is so shocked by this. If it was just Americans, okay, we're glorifying one of our own. There are references to him on every continent of the globe. There are statues, there are monuments, there are things named after him on every continent, even Antarctica. Yes, it's true. He had to do something right. That would be my pushback. Oh, third question. I think you. Well, you know, there's a two question precedent, right? All right. What do you got? What do you got for me? Sure. Yes. Yeah. So he wanted to leave after the first term. And it was Madison and Hamilton behind the scenes. Please stay, don't leave, we need you, you're the best, all that stuff. He is, and you could see it in the farewell address, you could see it in the proclamation of neutrality, you could see it in his policy decisions as president. He is concerned about the nation breaking apart. He wants to build up the foundation of the country first. That's what he's focused on. So I think he does that. Again, at that point, let's say he left after one term. All right, so maybe the precedent said at one term, maybe. Maybe not, but he's still, if he leaves after one term, he's still George Washington. I don't think it really changes his legacy. But he stays, I think, because he does want to see this project through. He wants to make sure this republic preserves. And I think there is a fear, and there's a book, a recent book that Tom Ricks wrote this about the pessimism of the founders. There's a fear. And you see it from a lot of the founders. You see it from Adams, you see it from Jefferson, from Madison, that this could fall apart, that this revolution will end. And if Washington isn't president, okay, let's play it out. If it's Washington, then it's Adams. We saw that the nation almost descended into civil war in that election of 1800. Washington is aware and afraid of potential civil war. He's afraid of potential civil war for a variety of reasons, ranging from slavery to sectionalism to partisanship. I think he does that. Again, this is the idea of civic virtue. Does it help his legacy in some ways? In some ways you could argue yes, but actually he's less popular in the second go-around than he is in the first. But he doesn't need the job. I think that's his idea of service at that point, when he's wanted to go home. Again, I go back to Gladiator. Think about Marcus Aurelius to Maximus. That is why it must be you. No, not the. Again, I'm sure someone could. Again, if someone finds from some scrap of paper, some document, maybe I have no doubt someone somewhere expressed that. I'm sure George III is like, yes, now he's going to do it. Yeah. So I'm sure there's someone somewhere that thinks that, but by and large, he's proved it at that point. I think again, like we saw, a lot of that fear even went away as early as 1775, and then it really goes away after 1783. So yeah, I don't think there's any real fear at that point. There's more fear of what happens when he's not there. Will this work with someone else? All right, thank you so much.